All right, everybody, welcome to the newest episode of Hudson Valley Omnivore. I'm your host, Paul Franetovich, and this is, I think, going to probably be the last installment in the flower series. We're focusing on something, and I know I say this every time, but my favorite thing, pasta. And in today's episode, we're going to, as usual, go through some interesting facts in the history of pasta across the world, which many people think was sort of invented in China, brought to Italy from China in 1295. Not true. We're going to go over that in a little while. And then we are going to review a couple of the really fantastic restaurants that I went to across the Hudson Valley. This is going to bring us sort of out of the norm here and off 87, and it's going to be interesting. So we'll go over that as well. And then we're going to wrap up with an interview with Brian Paragas, who's the executive chef at Little Goat in Rhinebeck. And that's a good one. You want to stick around for that. So, get your fork, get your spoon. Let's go. It's time for pasta. Okay, so it's time to learn a little bit about pasta, right? We need to always start with a little bit of history, a little bit of understanding where things came from. And as I mentioned in the intro, there's a myth that says that Marco Polo brought pasta to Italy for the first time from China in 1295. And what I've learned is that is not true. That's a marketing myth that was invented in 1929 by something called, yes, this is a real publication, the Macaroni Journal. And that it's ridiculous. Anyway, so the true origin of the noodle is much more decentralized. But if we're going sort of and tracing the absolute oldest physical evidence of a noodle per se or a pasta per se, we would travel to China along the Yellow River. So in 2005, archaeologists unearthed an overturned earthenware bowl sealed in clay from about 4,000, and underneath it was perfectly preserved, delicate yellow noodles made from millet. So meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, the ancient Greeks and the Romans were chewing on something they called lagana, which were broad sheets of dough, fried or baked, but they weren't boiled back then. Cicero and Horace actually raved about it. So wow. But the real ancestors of pasta, which is called pasta secca or dried pasta, as we know it, which is sort of the boiled, shelf-stable, and it's made from durum wheat, were perfected by Arab traders and nomadic tribes all the way back in the 5th century. So they needed something lightweight and sort of a desert hardy ration, and they called it itria, which later morphed into a Sicilian word very similar, itria, still used for vermicelli in the Sicilian language today. So Sicily, big part of this, right? By the Middle Ages, Sicily, which was then an Islamic emirate, became Europe's first sort of major pasta factory. And there was a geographer in 1154 called Al-Idrisi said that Trabia was exporting shiploads of itria, that's Sicilian word for the dried pasta, across the Christian and Muslim worlds. So it was all the way back in 1154. So pasta's been around forever. Now, then people didn't eat it the way that we eat it now. It was, for centuries, mostly a luxury item for the elite, and it was served sweet. So the Renaissance noblemen blanketed their pasta in, sugar, cinnamon, and sweet cheeses, which I find very, very interesting. There's also, the fork was invented because of pasta. So in the 1700s, they used to eat it with their hands. So it wasn't until a chamberlain of King Ferdinand IV in Naples, a man named Gennaro Spadaccini, realizes this is ridiculous. It's not royal. You can't use your hands when you're a royal. So he added a few extra prongs to the traditional peasant fork, and that's literally where the fork came from, to eat pasta. So by the 18th century, pasta became a food of the Neapolitan masses. They were called the I lazzaroni. So thanks to the invention of the mechanical press, they could eat it in larger batches. Across the English Channel, when British elites returned from their tour of Italy, they had become so obsessed with this sort of exotic food that they were called the Macaroni Club, which I think is funny. So they wore wigs, flashy clothes, and this is what led to the line in the childhood song that I'm sure you remember, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. So Yankee Doodle wasn't talking about the pasta, he was talking about the Americans' fashionable snobs. So pasta pairing with tomato, right, which is what we see the most today, is relatively recent. And it's a direct product of European colonialism. So prior to the Columbian Exchange, Europe had never seen a tomato at all. They were native to the Andes in Mesoamerica, therefore never made it over to Europe. So when the Spanish conquistadors brought them back, Europeans thought they were poisonous. And this is interesting because I mentioned this in an earlier episode, the pizza episode. Wealthy aristocrats used to eat off of pewter plates. So the acidic tomatoes used to leach lead from the plates into the tomatoes, and they would eat the lead and that would kill them. So, of course, folks thought that that the tomatoes were poisonous, that it had nothing to do with that. So eventually, Naples realized that the tomato was safe, and it became sort of the ultimate geopolitical catalyst. Durum wheat requires specific arid conditions. So the hunger for the grain drove massive agricultural shifts. So in the 19th and 20th century, the demand for pasta, which was fueled by the unification of Italy, it's famously said that one of the generals, Cesare Alba, said, "By God, it will be the macaroni, I swear, that unifies Italy." Later, during World War II, Mussolini has the sort of futurist movement, and he tries to ban pasta in Italy, claiming that it makes Italians lethargic and unwarlike. And the citizens practically revolted, right? So you can take away their freedom, but not their penne. So that kind of takes us to sort of the shadows. I always like to talk a little bit about some of the cultural challenges and appropriations and the cost of doing this sort of thing. And the history of wheat farming is deeply intertwined with serfdom, slavery, and colonial land grabbing. So in the 18th and 19th century, the Russian Empire turned to the Ukraine as a massive durum wheat breadbasket, specifically to export grain to the pasta factories of Naples and Genoa. This wealth was built on the backs of millions of Ukrainian serfs living in pretty much slavery under Tsarist rule. And then furthermore, during the 19th century Italian diaspora, millions of impoverished southern Italian farmers fled exploitation at home, migrating to the Americas, and they became a cheap labor force that built the infrastructure of the New World, fueled largely by eating pasta. That's how they got their energy. So again, went from a systemic economic exploitation for farming at home and then came over to the United States and then were forced into cheap labor to build the country that we all live in today. So even today, the dark side persists. I mean, I've talked about the caporalato system for modern tomato harvesting in southern Italy, which still goes on. It's an exploitative system where, migrant laborers from Africa and Eastern Europe are subjected to human trafficking and terrible wages and dangerous work conditions. So there's definitely a dark side to this. So again, as I always say, make sure that the places that you're going are using ethical methods, ethical ingredients, and that they're supporting the types of organizations that pay a fair wage and treat their workers and their employees with love and respect. So how do we bring this now back to the Hudson Valley? History is sort of a living organism, and the story of pasta is now taking root here in the Hudson Valley, and I bet you didn't know that. But as we've talked about throughout this flour series, there's sort of a renaissance of ancient grains, ancient wheats being used to make pasta. So, decades of modern industrial pasta, it's monoculture, hyper-processed flour, white flour stripped, no oils, no nothing, doused in glyphosate. But the grain renaissance is happening here. So local farmers, the visionaries at Hive Farm in Clinton Corners, which sort of started all, and then the great Sparrowbush, which was the first place we talked about in this flower series, and it's great. You should go back and listen to that episode, as there's this sort of delicate thread through all of these episodes, which have sort of brought us back to Sparrowbush in every instance, which I did not know was going to happen. These folks are reviving the heritage and ancient grains, and they're growing them and they're milling them right here in the Hudson Valley. So because that is available, chefs and artisanal pasta makers in the region are using this fresh stone ground flour to completely reinvent pasta. So this particular pasta is not super uniform. It's not that lifeless yellow commercial box of pasta. It's speckled, robust, nutty. It's delicious. It's structurally magnificent. And it tastes of this place and time and the specific microclimate that we have here in the Hudson Valley. And it's a wonderful subversion of sort of the industrial food complex that has dominated for so long, sort of shifting pasta from a commodity of global exploitation, as I mentioned before, into an artisanal craft of hyper-local ecology, I guess. There are literally hundreds of restaurants in the Hudson Valley that serve pasta, and many of those restaurants are excellent, 5 out of 5 stars. So I needed to have some sort of strategy to find the types of places that I wanted to highlight. And so I chose to stick with our subject format in this installment series of flour and stick with the locally grown and milled grain renaissance that's happening here that I've learned about in the Hudson Valley. And so the places that I chose are using local grains and they're making their pasta in-house by hand or extruded. And there's far less of those, although there are many more than I thought there would be. And so this is a truncated list of the places that I could actually get to, some of which are sort of far west. So we're getting off of 87, we're going out into the mountains, into the farms, and we're going to talk about those places. So this is in no particular order, although I'm going to start with a place that's close by, right down the street from where I live, called Via Cassia, which is in Hudson, New York. And it is chefed by Gaetano Arnone, who has worked in a lot of different places, including Tuscany. And he serves traditional Tuscan pasta dishes, uses Tuscan techniques, and very seasonal. The menu changes quite often, and all the pasta are actually hand-shaped in-house, and they are delightful. This is definitely our local go-to joint, and really the standout dishes for me in the pasta world is definitely the amatriciana, which comes with a bucatini noodle that, for a hand-rolled pasta, has a very similar bite to a dried pasta, which is almost impossible to do unless you know exactly what you're doing, not just in cooking the pasta and taking it out at the perfect time and finishing in the pan with the sauce, but also it must be made very well. And when you're using local grains, it's a very delicate balance in order to get that texture. And we love that place. Leanne, my wife's favorite dish is the aglio olio, and that's another really, really good one. But everything we've had there is absolutely magnificent, and the chef spends a lot of time on the floor. So if you go there, you're going to see him, and you should say hello. Next, we're going to travel to Amenia, New York, to a place called Troutbeck, which is chefed by Gabe McMacken. So they actually host a pasta night every Monday, and there's many different dishes of pasta, all of which they source flours from Wild Hive Farm, which I mentioned earlier as one of the leaders and one of the original folks that started to grow and mill flour here in the Hudson Valley, and they use specialty grains like spelt to make their pasta. So and it's not just about pasta. I'm going to tell you about everything. It starts with like this little baby bread loaf, super tender. It's like a little undercooked, a little sweet, with this amazing butter with some spice and honey in it and some peppercorn, pink peppercorn. And it reminded me of the most delicious and most elevated version of an Outback Steakhouse bread, which maybe if they hear this, they're going to yell at me about that. But that for me that's actually a really, really high compliment. Then I followed that up with oysters, and instead of a regular mignonette, they had a rhubarb and pink peppercorn with basil mignonette. Absolutely outstanding. Followed by a scallop crudo, which had caracara oranges in it and some ground cherries. If you know what those are, anyway, you probably know what they are if you live in the Hudson Valley. So tender, delicious, absolutely dynamite. And then comes the pasta. They made a cavatelli with ricotta and peas. The pasta was just perfectly cooked. Again, to be able to get an al dente, perfectly cooked pasta that's made with local high moisture grains is an art and a science together. It had a delicious lemony flavor, herby delight, but you had this like bite of the pasta, which was al dente, perfect, tasty, had some nuttiness to it. Really excellent dynamite pasta dish. Just I couldn't believe it. So I'm definitely going back for pasta night on a Monday here coming up. And then we're gonna drive out a little further to Livingston Manor at a place called the De Bruce. And the De Bruce is both a hotel and a restaurant. It's in the Catskills. You got to basically climb a mountain to get there. And it has this like old world charm. It's a wide porch. There's a porch swing. All the floors are original. There's a downstairs bar that's bracingly charming. It is like being at a hunting cabin. Lots of orangish yellow wood everywhere. There's live fires, perfect dim lighting, beautiful ambiance, great vibes. And so I had a drink down there before dinner. Really enjoyed that. Coming back up the stairs to the dining room, there was a fairly large space on one side. And then when you sort of walked back, the open kitchen was on the right, and there were windows looking out on them. It was dark, so I couldn't see. I'm sure the view was amazing. It was floor-to-ceiling windows with probably 6 tables. And so very, very intimate. very beautiful, and the meal did not disappoint. It's sort of trout season right now, I guess we would call that here. I don't really know much about fishing seasons, but there's trout everywhere. And I started with a smoked trout toast, which was absolutely insane. There was tons of flake trout. It was on a really crispy sourdough crust, and then it had trout roast sprinkled on top of that, and then a gremolata. Really, oof, such a good dish. Then the pasta. Oh my God, the pasta. So they use not just local grains, but the DeBruce gets their grains from their neighbor. There's a farm that's out there that's growing the grains just for them. And so they made sort of a short, thick, rustic noodle was freehand. There was almonds and crispy kale on top for like nice crunch and flavor. So they had a hot sauce flavor to it. There was definitely some hot sauce in there, and that mixed with some butter almost gave it a buffalo wing sauce kind of flavor in absolutely the best way. It was absolutely amazing. The pasta perfectly cooked. The flavor of the pasta was amazing. And again, you still, when you're using these local ancient grains, you're getting flavor of the pasta as well as the bite, as well as all the ingredients on it, which was ethereal. Very good pasta. And then I ended with a hanger steak, which was perfectly tender. And each piece of cut hanger steak had a morel on top of it, which was unctuous. And it was a veal demi. It was the meal was otherworldly. Eric Levely, he's a James Beard semifinalist. This is very clear talent in what he's doing out there. Should definitely give it a try. And last but not least, we visited Little Goat, and Little Goat is helmed by Brian Paragas, who's the executive chef, and the interview that I have with him is coming up right after this segment, and you definitely want to stick around for that because I'm just going to say magnolia blossoms. That's all I'll say. Anyway, so after the interview, we went downstairs, and Little Goat had the most pasta on their daily menu. And there were maybe 5 or so dishes that were there. And so instead of trying to figure out what to eat, we just ordered everything, and we ate everything. So this is in order of serving, because I think that has a lot to do with how much we loved the service. So we started with a risotto, which had spring ramps and pesto. Dynamite. So fresh, oniony in a perfect way. The risotto was perfectly cooked. The sauce was super decadent, but it was still light and fresh at the same time. And then we had the bucatini with the sourdough sofrito, which you'll hear about in the interview, which is kind of crazy. There was crispy croutons, and there was a basil oil at the bottom that's so delicious at the bottom of the dish. And so the local flour brings kind of like a unique color and texture and flavor to the party. It makes for an excellent combo and an excellent dish when everything sort of comes together. And then there's a roasted garlic flavor sort of throughout the dish that lingers sort of in the best way. And then the dish that I love the most, the Parisian gnocchi, was legitimately insane. This is a dish that they only make on very special occasions. Chef was nice enough to make it for us when we were there. There were fava beans with the perfect texture as sort of a foil, because the gnocchi was so soft and luscious and pillowy. And then there was country ham at the bottom. It was like hit of salt and umami, but the whole thing was more of like a little bit of a noodle dish with a loose sauce. And so everything kind of soaked that up, and it was not just a delicious dish, but technically adroit and executed perfectly. And then after that there was a cacio e pepe dish, which was phenomenal. Tasted like it tasted to me like I would imagine a buttered pasta dish in a Parisian trattoria would taste. A little bit, same ingredients, a little bit different traditionally, and just tasted like absolutely the best buttery noodle with like a really nice peppery punch. Somehow pasta cooked perfectly, even though it's fresh. Again, very difficult thing to do. And then last but not least, there was a pork ragu with rigatoni, which was a standout. Absolutely unctuous, great umami. There was some spice in there, and the rigatoni perfectly al dente. So it was a really nice end to the meal. It ramped up in intensity and also in body, and really, really enjoyed the meal. Chef Paragas came over a few times, was asking, we were talking. He's a very, very cool guy. It's a very beautiful space as well. Little Goat is designed meticulously, and you should definitely head over there anytime. But if you want the pasta, go for dinner. You're really going to enjoy it. And so with that, we're going to go right into the interview with Chef Paragas. So tell me the story. Like sort of what was life like? What was your career like? How'd you end up here in Rhinebeck?
Sure. So I'm from New York City originally. Grew up over there, East Village, Filipino family. And I wasn't into cooking originally. Like I know a lot of chefs and whatnot have these elaborate origin stories where they are cooking since they were standing. I wasn't like that. I enjoyed eating and we would always have a lot of food with the family, but it wasn't ever the center of my life until, maybe a little bit later, starting in high school and college, watching food television. My dad loved food, so we'd go out to restaurants in the city all the time and he would watch Iron Chef and all the East Food Network classics, Bobby Flay and Emerald and whatnot. So that was always in the background, but it wasn't ever the center for me. But starting, I guess, like in high school and then in college, it was something where I just like did it in my free time, getting really into food, kind of alongside the rise of all of like the online food content, Serious Eats and Eater and all of those things where just going into recipes and whatnot. So that's kind of how I started cooking. And I wasn't even wanting to do restaurants originally. I went to college for political science and tried to do that for a couple of years. I wasn't sure. I was thinking about international relations or something that was not food related. And I was working at a nonprofit. Funding got cut. So I was laid off and I was like, you know what? Let me try the food thing that I've always wanted to try. And about 14 years later. So I started cooking in the city, a couple of different places. The main one was at Hearth in the East Village with Marco Canora. Stayed there for a couple of years. Did pasta and stuff over there with all the flour and whatnot to Philly, where I worked at Sahav and Vetri Cucina for a while. Vetri was definitely the place where I was at and kind of made me as a chef, I think. Stayed there for 5 years, maybe a little bit over that, and really got into pasta and Italian food over there. But then after that, so that's, finishing up around COVID, I felt like I needed a switch and made my way down to Tennessee and worked at Blackberry Mountain, which is part of Blackberry Farm, one of the places I've always heard about and wanted to check out. And, I never worked in that kind of big hotel resort environment. So I just wanted to make that switch that was like a totally different and, the Vetri Cucina 32-seat jewel box restaurant into a massive 5,000 acre resort with like 1,000 people or something working for the company. But it was awesome. I mean, they're such an institution and the food was different enough, where I always felt like every move in my career had to have some kind of big change up where it wasn't the same thing I was doing for the past so many years. And, got really into like foraging and whatnot over there, which is awesome. And a kid, which is why my wife and I moved up over here. She's from like New Paltz.
Oh,
so, being closer to family, her family, my family in the city, we were like, we can't manage this without that kind of support. So made our way up over here and I didn't really have any plans. I was going to wing it and I was thinking, well, maybe I could do like pop-ups or do that kind of thing. Maybe even switch. I actually staged at Sparrowbush for a day with Grayling when I moved up here.
Shout out to Grayling.
Yeah, shout out to Grayling, connecting everyone. Yeah. Because, they have such awesome bread. I'd heard about it, went there, tasted it. This is awesome. Was like thinking, oh, maybe I want to, do a little pivot, try out baking for a bit. Didn't work out exactly. But I found this job at Little Goat with Tavo and Aaron. And the whole concept was it was scarily tailored to everything I'd done so far, pastas, vegetables, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern influence from Zahan, and all of these things are just like kind of combining together in the space, and that's where I am now.
That's an amazing story. How specifically did your Filipino background and then your time in each one of those cities, like the places that you were in, how did that impact how you cook today?
I think it's really reflecting in how global I cook. And it's not just when I think about dishes, I like pulling not just ingredients, but techniques and influences from different places that make sense together. It's like how there's convergent evolutions of different cuisines that somehow end up getting the same techniques or the same flavor profiles, even though they're completely different otherwise. It's just, the environment, the terroir, the climate, all kind of influence these places to cook similarly. And I love pulling those things together and then making it make sense in a dish. And I think that's definitely from growing up, New York City, East Village, Italian food, Ukrainian food, Jewish food, Chinese food, Filipino food, like all of these things are just every day was a different cuisine and it wasn't ever the same thing. And then same with going to Philly with the huge like Italian population, but also the Vietnamese population and Ethiopian, and just like continuing to just like eat these different styles of food and then just trying to make those links between cuisines. And I think that that's definitely how those places kind of influence me. We have like a dish where it's this turmeric cauliflower dish that's on the menu right now that I kind of describe as North Africa by way of Sicily.
Nice.
It's like, that's like a big trading port. And you have all the spices there, but then you have like this like gremolata idea. You have the dried fruits that appear in both cuisines, the spices, the cinnamon, the turmeric, all of these things that are, they're different, but it all kind of makes sense together. Yeah. And then it's that kind of cooking that I like. The blank by way of blank,
I love that. The last person that I interviewed, Steven from Romanaccio Osteria, talked about time and place. That it's almost an ingredient in the food. So that's interesting that you're taking seemingly juxtaposed things, but making them into a cohesive dish, which is clear on the menu.
Yeah.
It was clear when we ate, especially that pork dish with all the different things that were there was so different, which I also love about your cooking in this and Little Goat, which is that it may have the same ingredients, but you're doing it in a completely different way than most of the restaurants that are around. So I'm assuming that's on purpose. Yeah. And it's, as you just said, a mix of all the things that you've done.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, time and place definitely dictates everything we do here. I try to have everything on the menu relate to Hudson Valley in one form or another, because there's nothing more I hate in a restaurant than in one that doesn't feel connected to its place.
I agree.
There should be something that makes it a special restaurant is one where it can only be found in where it is in both that time and that place. Even if it's like, an Italian restaurant in New York City, going back to that, it's like, well, the reason why that's there is because of all this history with immigration, same with any other kind of like ethnic food, basically. Or in more fine dining, chefy kind of context, it's that kind of, there has to be a reason why I'm cooking this dish at this time at this restaurant. And I try that with, even if like the influences and the flavors come from somewhere else, it's still rooted in that Hudson Valley produce, Hudson Valley time of year, as much as we can.
Yeah, I think you do a great job of that. And one of the big differences here, though, is that not everybody in the Hudson Valley, but many of the restaurants in the Hudson Valley have the same access to the same ingredients, because it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's almost like farm to table is cliche around here, because of course it is. But you do a really good job of making it different. And the locality that you just mentioned is a good segue into sort of like, let's talk a little bit about pasta. This is the pasta episode, of course. And one of the things that intrigued me the most about your pasta was that you're using locally grown and locally milled flour from Sparrowbush Bakery, which again, shout out to Grayling. And it seems to be this very, very delicate string through all of these episodes. And this was never on purpose. I didn't actually know that it was going to end up this way, but tell me a little bit about the relationship, why you're using that flour, why that's important to you, and how it influences or how it impacts the food that you make. Pasta specifically.
For sure. I mean, it's funny because all of the places, everywhere that I've worked that has pasta on the menu was a restaurant with a flour mill. So going back to Hearth in the East Village, we would do whole grain pasta there. So it was just it was something where I grew up with it as a cook and thinking, oh, this is normal. This is pasta. You make it tied to wherever we are and you make it as fresh as possible because you want to preserve the flavors, the oils, the essential parts of that grain, and then going into Vetri. It was the same thing. We had a flour mill upstairs, and we would mill most of the flour for the pasta, the bread, anything like the polenta. And
Wow.
that was cool because that's where I really got into the kind of combining different grains and using different kinds of flour for pasta. I did we did like a masa pasta there, a masa harina pasta.
Really?
That was tasted literally like straight up tortilla.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I think like all of those things just kind of gave me that idea that this is what pasta should be, and it shouldn't just be the imported 00 white bleach pasta that most places use. I mean, it's great. It works well. It's a lot easier to make pasta out of that and the durum semolina. And it's not like we don't use those flours also. Like we have to use it for some kind of production, making it all like even and consistent. But I love using those kinds of flours because again, it ties you to place. We have a cacio e pepe, which otherwise, you're missing a piece of the Hudson Valley in that kind of pasta regularly. We don't have an equivalent to Parmesan, black pepper, but what we do have is flour. So if I can make our pasta with a portion of it, usually between 20 and 30% of local New York State sparrowbush flour, then I can still kind of, in my mind, tie that to being like, this pasta is still from here because it's grown here. The most essential part of the pasta is here,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's fun playing around with that in both like, bread, obviously, and pasta as well, which I think, not as common yet.
Not as common at all. I mean, one of the things that I've learned through this installment series has been flour, is that there's a grain, like a revolution, not really a revolution. It's sort of going back to the way it was before. There's a reimagining of grain here. It's sort of a new grain belt, and there are a handful of people that are growing grain, and then people like grailing at sparrowbush is grinding and bringing that back to restaurants and the ability to do that. And it's surprising how many folks are starting to do that again, getting on board with local grain, which is just something that I didn't even know until I started this, didn't even know that existed. So tell me a little bit about the pastas that you make. And obviously you're making them in-house, but how are you making them? Are you making only a certain type of pasta, or you have an extruder? Tell me a little bit about that.
Most of our pastas here are extruded, just like the amount of people that we serve every day, the complexity of the restaurant itself is that extruded pasta is the easiest for us to deal with. But we've had other pastas on the menu. We've had nudis. We have a Parisian gnocchi that we run as a special on occasion. We've done whole egg pasta, like pasta spaghetti alla Catara that I cut on a Catara cutter. Egg yolk pasta that we do for, we had like a white pork ragu in the winter that we did with that. Nice. So, there's a bunch of different kinds of pastas, and they all use different amounts of the local, like the whole egg or the egg yolk pasta. That's the one that's the heaviest on the local grain, which I like a lot. It's the sifted whole wheat flour we get from sparrowbush, and then that one like works as a great pasta flour. It's like sifted, so you don't get like all of those the husks and whatnot, the outside parts of the flour that you would get that cuts up gluten structure sometimes at flour, so it like really develops nicely.
Got it.
And yeah, those are the main ones. I really would love to do more hand-rolled cheese, though. I think that's the most time-consuming and almost impossible to do on any kind of like large-scale level, unless you're, Evan Finke and LA.
That's why I asked the question, because there's obviously an angle to it. You have to make money, so doing everything hand.
Yeah, you would need like 4 people full time, just like hand rolling pastas
constantly.
Because at Vetri we would always have we would always try to have at least 1 or 2 hand-rolled shapes. But then when you're on pasta station, every piece of downtime during service, I would have my wooden cutting board and just rolling Trophier or Buziati or any of these awesome like shapes, the Orchetti, which I still need to learn how to do the one. Have you seen those videos where they do it one motion and make the
somehow
Orchetti?
We see like an Italian grandma just making like dozens
Yeah.
of orchetti at a
Just
time. It's
crushing
just
it.
like one thing, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom. Yeah, it's great.
That's my white whale, I guess, of pasta shapes, is to master the
Orchetti.
one move orchetti.
Best of luck with that. We're talking about pasta dishes. When you're developing a new pasta dish or you're testing something, do you start with the ingredients or do you start with the pasta and the shape? How do you create new dishes?
It depends on the pasta dish. But what I really like about pasta is that it's totally, that form is function with pasta. Like the right shape is for the right sauce and it all works together. That's like what I think makes it fun versus like other kinds of noodles or other kinds of, I guess noodles, the catch-all in my mind of wheat product that's like cooked in a wet medium. I don't know. There are some things where it's like, oh, this is really cool. I really like, ramps are in season, for example. That's like the big thing right now. And great. What can I do with that? And then it's like, what kind of sauce do I want with that? And then you're thinking, well, if it's a smoother sauce, let me go with something that can catch it or twirl it up really nice. Like bucatini, for example. Other times, I've made pastas where I'm like, oh, I really have fallen in love with this one shape. What sauce is going to work with that? And like right now, like there's these, I made ones like are really big orchettis that we call like orchionis. And that one is like, well, you want like a really rustic sausage pasta, like scoop it all up, and that's part of the fun, maybe like the most fun part of pasta for me is like when you can like really marry the sauce, the ingredients and the shape together in a way that it makes sense. And I don't know, again, like pet peeves of a pasta where it's like, this is a completely wrong shape for the sauce. If someone makes an agnolotti that doesn't have like, with a pocket and it doesn't have a sauce to catch it, I'm like, what are we doing here? I guess that's how I'd answer that or think about it.
Yeah.
And I just like that combination, that intersection.
What else is important about using a local grain specifically in the pasta that you're making?
I mean, besides like the intellectual idea of just tying it there, I think like the flavor also gets helped a lot with local grain. It's fresher, holding it in your freezer or fridge and like milling it as close as possible to it being used helps a lot. And it just adds like it just nudges it a little. It's not like the biggest flavor difference, but when you try them side by side, it's like eating, it really is like eating white bread when you like a store-bought white bread versus, not even just sourdough, but like another, basic bread, like a pain de mie or something like that made with whole wheat. And it just has like that little something extra, the little like nuttiness or that little extra savory umami depth of flavor that you can't get with bleached white flour. And I think that's really great. I mean, especially when you do really simple pastas like aglio olio, just 2 ingredients and you just want to make it like that most pure flavor. And then one of the flavors that people overlook is that of the flour. Yeah. And then it could be like, or even different flours in that regard. You could either use, you don't have to use the whole wheat. You could use the spelt flour. You can use einkorn. You can use rye in just different. And it's a fun, let me experiment with this and try a bit more of this day and more of the rye another day. And, you just kind of wing it because then that's a fun part of pasta is that a lot of times it's pretty forgiving. Especially just like making it at home, just like playing around with it. And then if you really want to get nerdy with it, you can look at the protein content and the gluten content and whatnot and be like, all right, well, if I want it to work the same way as a standard 00 and durum pasta, I have to use X amount of this and X amount of this other one to make it so that it has the same protein to make it act the same way.
Yeah.
But I like more just winging it. I'm a cook. I'm a chef. It's like a savory chef. I like, playing around with stuff until it works out. And, I don't want to do too much math.
That's great. I love that. And that you mentioned a thing that people don't think about the flavor of the flour or the flavor of the pasta because it's all about the ingredients that are on top of it or the sauce. And that's a big thing. People miss that because most pasta, like you said, doesn't taste like anything.
Yeah.
So it's just a vehicle to get a sauce into you. But like you said, there's a huge difference between those when you're using that local flour.
Yeah. And it could make sense with the sauce as well.
Yeah.
It could be something, I don't know, riffing like I don't have it on the menu or anything like that, or I've worked on it. But if you did something like with rye and then you used rye in a sauce, I don't know. There's always these
Speaking
ways
my
to
language.
connect. Yeah, there's always the ways to connect things together that it makes make sense. And I'm always a fan of like that double down or triple down of the same ingredient and like variations on like how you get different flavor out of the same exact thing, and then just layering that onto a pasta. And then you can totally do that with flour. Like that masa harina flour that we used in a pasta dough, doing that with like corn on it was really good. Doing that one and, pork ragu that kind of was reminiscent of carnitas. It's like, a little on the nose, but it's good. And there's a reason why it works.
Yeah, that's insane. That's insane.
Yeah.
So I'll be looking forward to a rye whiskey pasta dish coming in the future. So you have a pork ragu that uses a sourdough sofrito?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's a technique I learned at Vetri where we had this one pasta that we would always joke was our hoagie ragu because it was made with bread, pickles, mustard, all the things you would put in a hoagie. And I kind of pulled that idea and then reinvented it knowing that we would have sourdough trim from Sparrow. And then we kind of make this merguez sausage with the pork we get in from Veritas Farms and, sear that off and then toast the sourdough trim and leftovers in it. So it kind of soaks up all of this fat and then acts as this panade, like when you make like a meatball, you have like that panade bread soak. It's kind of becomes like that kind of bread panade for this ragu. And then you throw in the, all the other aromatics and white wine and all those things and it just like melts. And then it makes the sauce for that one like extra luscious because it's almost like you're using or making a roux, but it's sourdough.
That's insane. That's insane. And the one thing that you don't hear is my wife that's off to the side, Leanne, is drooling over the sourdough sofrito. So do you have anything to say about that sourdough sofrito? That's amazing. This has been great. This has been great. So I'm going to ask you some like wrap up questions, fun questions that I come up with, and some of them I've been cursed at for asking. But so, what's your death row meal?
Oh my god, death row meal. That's a tough one. I don't know. Has anyone been able to answer that?
Everybody has given an answer. I don't know if it was the answer they wanted to give or the one that they could come up with. It's a tough question.
It is a tough question.
Yeah.
Death row meal. I don't know. My mind kind of goes to like fried chicken of some sort.
Nice.
Maybe that. Barbecue, like brisket.
Somebody said Popeye's chicken.
Popeye's chicken.
That's close.
Yeah. That was literally one of the first things that like came up on my mind. It's like, well, I mean, if this is it, I mean, there's not much better than Popeye's.
That is a very good one.
Yeah. So those things, maybe like, if you go to Asia, it'd be like Hainanese chicken rice. I love a lot. Yeah. Maybe it's like the weather talking right now, but it's like one of those classic dishes when it gets hot out. It's like, this is one of like the things that I love the most when it's like hot.
I love that. I love that. That's great. So what's your favorite ingredient right now? So you just mentioned the timing and it's warm outside. What's your favorite ingredient to use right now?
Right now, I'm most excited right now. We like the magnolia blossoms that we pickled down there. I was mentioning it earlier.
You mentioned it to me earlier. Tell me about that. Is that a thing that where does that come from?
Just people foraging, making use of things. It tastes like sushi ginger. It straight up tastes like ginger. Like the neon pink ones you'd get at the supermarket with the sushi there. It's we have a tree in the backyard and then, you pick the blossoms off before they fully open so they're tight and they're still very bright. And then just pick the leaves and just pickle them like you would any other pickle.
That's mind-blowing. My mind is literally blown all over the place. So if you could only make one dish of pasta for the rest of your life, what would it be?
One dish pasta, a matriciana.
Boy, I really like you a lot.
It's like my go-to. Like if it's especially for like family meals or something like that, and then you're like, well, I got 15 minutes on the clock. What can I make in the time it takes for the pasta to finish cooking in the pasta tank? It's like, well, I got a matriciana. I'll always have bacon and I'll always have tomatoes of some kind.
So if you were like, I just got off of work, I'm going home, I want to eat something, but I don't want to eat out. Is that what you would make yourself?
Yeah, that one or like aglio, because I think like those are the two classics that I love the most.
Leanne is fist pumping because that's her favorite pasta dish. And yeah, those are such great choices. So okay, so when you're not eating here or you're not eating your own food, where are you going? What restaurants are you going to right now?
I live like just south of Kingston. So really going to places there like Eliza, I really like a lot.
Mm.
It's just so solid. It's like a neighborhood restaurant that does it's better than it needs to be as a restaurant, which I think is kind of the vibe I want here as well. So we're an all day place, but I just want it to just be everything should be better than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I really like that a lot. I went to, I just went for the first time to Montauk Catch Club.
Oh.
And I thought that was great. It's just off, where is that, 32 or something like that, and near Kingston as well. And they've been a regular at some of the farmers markets around here.
That's cool.
But it sounds like they just get their stuff from local fishermen in Long Island and bring it up here, and they're just breaking down really high quality fish and cooking it simply. And they have got a backyard. And like I said, I only went there once for the first time a week or so ago, but I'm excited to go back in the summer and have some oysters and drink a wine.
That sounds amazing. Have you been to Mirador?
Yeah, I do like Mirador a lot as well.
Kingston, I don't know what it is about Kingston. Maybe you know what it is, but they have some of the best restaurants and just food establishments in the Hudson Valley. It's
definitely booming. Yeah. Because then I started going up here. So like my wife's from New Paltz, and I started visiting Hudson Valley regularly when we started dating like 10, 12, some whatever years ago.
I'll cut that part out.
So even just going up here all the time, it's the past like 5, 6 years, maybe even less than that, I think, when a lot of places are really popping up. There's always been like restaurants here and there, and there's always been that connection to farms and whatnot, but it was always so funny because it's all the farms are just supplying everywhere in the city, but around here you just didn't have that collection of restaurants until just that maybe that post-COVID migration up. Like New York's the city's just like getting too expensive. Yeah. Pricing people out, and people wanted to get closer to nature, farms, all that. So
it's a real good point. I think that probably has a lot to do with it. Rhinebeck's also great. Rhinebeck's got a lot of great restaurants for such a small area. So tell me a little bit about this place. So it's not just a dinner spot, right? It's almost not all day, but I mean, you have breakfast, pastries, all that, coffee, all that kind of stuff as well. Tell me, like, what should people know about Little Goat? What should people know to come here? Why should they come here?
Little Goat, so we're open breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week. And I think the thing that makes it special is that you can treat it however you want to treat a restaurant. It can be the cafe you bring a laptop to and have a coffee and an oatmeal cookie. It can be a casual business lunch thing with some sandwiches. A weeknight, you go sit at the bar and have a bowl of rigatoni. Or it could be a full blowout special occasion spot where you sit down and you order yourself like everything on the menu, and you have a great time. And it's that kind of neighborhood spot where just trying to make everything just better than it needs to be, like I said.
Yeah, I really like that. Better than it needs to be. We always love when we're surprised by a place that you didn't expect it. Yeah. There was almost no expectation going in, and you're like blown away. All right, last question. So when people leave here, when people come in, they eat your food, they eat your pasta specifically because it's a pasta special. What's the one word that you want them to say when they walk out the door?
That's a tough. I've never thought about that one before. It's a scary question.
Maybe. Tasty.
Just good food, I love chefing it up at times, but at the end of the day, I'm just trying to make really tasty food. That's the thing that matters over everything else, really, at the end of it. It's literally our business, making good food.
I love that. This was great. Very much appreciated, Chef. And we're going to go downstairs and have dinner, and we're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And there you have it, folks. That's a wrap. I think in the beginning I said that this might be the last installment in the flower series, and that's probably true, but I'm a little obsessed with bagels right now, as is everybody else. So we might have a little bonus episode where I review one or two, maybe an interview with some folks down the street that we love absolutely so much. So stay tuned for that. That's probably coming up next. But once that's done in the flower series is sunsetted, we're going to shift gears into what I'm calling installment of the producers. None of what I've talked about thus far is possible without the folks who produce the ingredients that go into these delicious meals. I know we've talked a little bit about wheat farmers and millers, but it's farmers market season. So the next installment series is going to be about producers, where we're going to focus on farms and all types of different places where these ingredients are coming from here in the Hudson Valley. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming soon to a podcast provider near you. Thanks for joining. Talk to you soon.